Since it's the new year, I wanted to compare all of the 2x2s that are, generally considered pretty good, and see which one is the best, or at least what would be the best for you. So to start off, I'm going to start with the YJ Guanpo, which is the cheapest 2x2 currently available, at least from what I could find, which is $4 on sites like the Cubicle or Speedcube Shop. Out of the box, it's slightly scratchy, but it's also fairly fast, and its corner cutting is okay, as you can see. Not great, though. It tends to lock up a little bit if I try to turn fast or do, as you can see, some fast algorithms. It tends to lock up. And also, I just don't really like the feel either. It's like harder plastic, so if you like the Guansu, then maybe it might be good for you. But in general, I wouldn't really recommend this even on a budget, because there are better puzzles that are only a little bit more expensive that I'll get into that are better than this. Next up, we have the Chi Cavs 2x2. This 2x2 is available for about $6, and I'd say it's a step above the Guanpo. However, out of the box, it locks up a lot, and it has a very scratchy feeling and clacky. It also is hard plastic, but I think it just feels better. It feels more solid than the Guanpo. And the thing is, it locks up though, and what I had to do was I had to mod the inner edge pieces and the inner corner pieces to actually get it to not lock up. So I wouldn't really recommend this. It's only $6, but the problem is you have to mod it to actually get it, really good, or not really good, but decent. And I personally don't think the modding is worth the time and effort for this puzzle. Next up, we have the Kung Fu 2x2. This cube is also $6, like the Chi Cavs, and this is the cubicle version, as you can see, but I also have a regular standard version that I set up myself. And the Kung Fu 2x2 is much like the Chi Cavs out of box. It doesn't lock up as much, but it has that sort of same smoothish feeling, but also fairly scratchy. But the thing about it is it has a lot better corner cutting than the Chi Cavs, and it doesn't lock up as much as the Cavs or the Guanpo does. And it's only $6, so on a budget I would highly recommend this. And even the cubicle version is only $13, $10 if you want stickerless, because they don't have to sticker it for you, which I also recommend, because $13 honestly isn't that much for a Cubicle Premium 2x2. So if you want a cheaper 2x2, and definitely one of the better 2x2s, I would stick with the Kung Fu 2x2. Next we have the Moyu Tangpo. The Moyu Tangpo is a pretty decent 2x2, and it comes in a whole variety of colors. As you can see, I got this one in blue. It comes in, all the Moyu crazy colors, but out of the box, it's very papery, and it is extremely fast, almost uncontrollably fast. And the corner cutting, as you can see here, is actually pretty nice. Reverse corner cutting is a little bit troublesome. It doesn't reverse corner cut too much, but it's enough to work, I think. As you can see, it's not terrible with lockups. It locks up. It sometimes gets those a little annoying catches, but it's not that bad. And it's $13 on the Cubicle and Speedcube Shop, but I think on Speedcube Shop right now it's on sale for about like $6 to $7, which is where I got it from, for only that much, which is pretty cheap. And I think it's worth, that $6 or whatever, but I don't think it's worth, personally, the $13 it is priced at normally. Next we have the Yushin Light, which came out earlier this year, and it is about $9 on websites such as the Cubicle. And and Sweet Cube Shop, and it's actually pretty nice for the price. I actually like it a little bit more than some of the other cubes, and it's smooth, and out of the box it has that swishy sound or swishy feel that the Yushin products generally have. However, out of the box it's also a little slow and a little loose, and the problem is if this cube is too loose, even by a little bit, the internal edge pieces will actually spin, and they'll cause pretty bad lockups that are annoying. But after tightening it, I don't really get those lockups anymore, and I can go pretty fast on it, but it's not, and it doesn't lock up. So I generally think this 2x2 is pretty good, and it's also controllable. It's not super fast, but with some Lubical Speedy and Silk and some Maru, it keeps a pretty good speed. The Maru makes it actually pretty fast, but with Speedy it is still controllable, and that's a good thing in the 2x2. Also, the corner cutting isn't terrible, but the reverse is a little lacking under some of the other cubes, but normal corner cutting isn't too bad. Also, one thing worth mentioning is that the screws are much smaller than other puzzle screws, as you can see here. Even smaller than something like the Diane, which also has small screws. But so if you need a really small screwdriver to be able to tension this properly. Next is the Guoguan 2x2, which is a very new release actually, and the first 2x2 and second puzzle ever from Guoguan brand, which released the Yushao, which is a very popular 3x3. And this 2x2 has a clacky-ish feeling. It's sort of similar to the Yushin White, where it has sort of this, like, not sluggish, but slightly slower feeling. It's not a bad feeling, certainly. And it's also very controllable, like the Yushin White, so I don't overshoot, and it reduces lockups and catching, which is pretty nice, but as you can see here, it still locks up a little bit sometimes. And the corner cutting is pretty good, and the reverse corner cutting especially is actually pretty good for a 2x2, I think, as you can see. And generally, I like this puzzle a lot. Next we have the Weipo, which this is the cubicle version, if you can tell, which is $18, but the normal version is only $13. Oh, I forgot to mention the Guoguan 2x2 is $12. And this cube has fairly smooth turning, as most of these other 2x2s do. All of the 2x2s I mentioned so far have fairly smooth turning, especially the Tangpo. But it has a slight sort of bumpiness, but not really bumpiness, but it's hard to explain unless you try a Weipo. It's fairly fast, not as fast as something like the Tangpo, but certainly faster than the Yushin White and the Guoguan. And it also has performance that is, pretty good, as a lot of 2x2ers actually really like this. Some even prefer it over the Diane, and corner cutting, as you can see, is even over 45. And then reverse corner cutting is also very good. However, if you're going to spend $13 on a 2x2, I would actually suggest purchasing a Cubicle Premium Kung Fu 2x2 over the standard version of this, but that's not just my personal opinion. Lastly, we have the Diane 2x2. Now the Diane 2x2 is a bit of an oddity out of these because it is out of the box at least, and without really modding or extensive break-in and lubing, it is fairly bumpy, as the rest of these, besides maybe the calves, are in general pretty smooth. However, after extensive breaking in, a small bit of modding internally, and a lot of lubing, it actually becomes basically as smooth as like the Waypo. This is a new plastic Diane, in case you're wondering. It's also a fairly hefty price of $16 on the Cubicle and Speedcube shop. However, you can find it on Amazon for only around $10, which is pretty nice for Diane 2x2, but if you don't want to spend that much, I understand. And the Diane 2x2 basically requires a lot of work to get really, really good. It takes around 600 solves to break in, or even upwards of 1,000 solves sometimes. And also you have to do, a bunch of mods internally. You have to scrape away a lot of flashing, because sometimes Diane puzzles come with a little bit of flashing internally, which hinders the performance. And then also you have to do things like round off the edge pieces, the 48 edge point mod, the corner mods, a lot of stuff like that. But once you do that and lube it and break it in, it becomes really, really nice and smooth, fast, as you can see. And it's also fairly controllable due to it being a heavier feeling 2x2. The turning is fairly heavy, and it's very controllable. And also the corner cutting on this is the best out of any 2x2 by far. It can cut over 45, as you can see. And it can also reverse cut by far the best out of 2x2s. It can go that far, which is, as you can see, not quite 45, but very far reverse cutting for a 2x2, almost on par with stuff like modern 3x3s, which is pretty insane for a 2x2, considering none of these get anywhere close to this much reverse corner cutting. So this means basically any lockups that you can see on camera right here, if they happen, are just completely my finger's fault and not the cube. So in general, if you want a cheap 2x2, I'd say the best option is just a standard Kung Fu 2x2. However, if you don't want to set up anything and you want a fairly cheap alternative, you can go with the Cubicle version, which is $13, as opposed to the normal Kung Fu, which is only $6. Since this one's cheaper than the Waypo, which is $18 as a Cubicle premium cube. And I suggest this for a cheap alternative because it's only $6, and the performance of this is really, really good for at least that price. And it's even better than some of the more expensive 2x2s. And I don't really recommend either of the calves and the Guanpo for cheap 2x2s, because I personally think they are completely outclassed by the Kung Fu 2x2. Now, for stability, the Guoguan 2x2 is the most flexy 2x2 by far out of these. So if you like a flexier 2x2, then I would suggest looking into getting the Guoguan 2x2, since it has a fairly flexible feel. But the most stable cubes are going to be the Diane, the Yushin White, and the Waypo, because they feel stable. They feel pretty solid in general. Like they don't flex too much. Well, the Weipo flexes a little bit more than the other two, but in general, it feels very stable. And for speed, the fastest cube is the Tangpo. It's almost uncontrollably fast. That's why I personally am not that big a fan of it, but I like its feel. It's a pretty nice 2x2. And if you want the fastest 2x2, definitely get the Tangpo if you really want a super fast 2x2. But if you want a sort of mid-speed 2x2, then go with, again, the Kung Fu 2x2, or something like, or if you want faster than the Kung Fu 2x2 but slower than the Tangpo, the Guanpo is pretty fast, but it has those lockup issues. But the most controllable 2x2s are definitely the Dian, the Guoguan, the Yushin. And the Weipo is sort of, I guess, the average speed. It's not too fast and not too slow, which is pretty nice, but I personally prefer the more controllable feel of these three puzzles and a heavily lubed Kung Fu 2x2 over something like the Tangpo or the Guanpo, which are, in my opinion, a little too fast for me. But in general, and then also for lockups, if you don't want to deal with lockups, then the best for that would be the Dian. The Dian does not lock up at all, basically. And then the Kung Fu 2x2 doesn't lock up much either, and the Weipo doesn't lock up too much. But it sometimes catches a little bit, but not as much as some of the other ones like the Tangpo, Guanpo, or the Cavs. Also, well, again, the Yushin White, the Guoguan 2x2, and the Weipo and the Dian don't really lock up. I think the Guoguan only looks like it's locking up because I'm not quite used to a flexible 2x2, but I feel like if you were to get used to a flexible 2x2, or if you like flexible 2x2s, I don't think this would lock up on you. I think it's just my turning style that doesn't really fit this cube particularly. But for lockups, I highly suggest these three puzzles, the Yushin White, Weipo, the Dian, because they don't lock up very much. And even the Kung Fu 2x2 doesn't lock up much either. The best corner cutting by far goes to the Dian. Second place would probably be the Weipo. And then sort of third place would be sort of the White and the Kung Fu 2x2. And Dian just has phenomenal corner cutting. So overall, I would say the best 2x2 is definitely the Dian. However, the only problem with it is that you have to put in a lot of work to make it good. So I don't really recommend this 2x2 to anyone who doesn't really want to compete in 2x2 that often or is that serious about 2x2, since it really takes a lot of time and work to make these things good, especially the new plastic ones I've heard the old plastic ones are just really good, but the new plastic ones are still really good in my opinion, but they take a lot of work. If you don't want to work too much, then things like the Weipo and the Kung Fu 2x2 are your next best bet, because they, out of the box, they're, not terrible like the Dian is. The Dian is not very good out of the box at all. And they only need a little bit of tensioning to get pretty decent. The Guoguan 2x2 is also pretty good without needing extensive work like the Dian. So in general, to the general cubers, I would recommend the Yushin White, the Weipo, the Guoguan 2x2, and the Kung Fu 2x2. For the advanced speed cuber, I would suggest by far just the Dian, or if you don't want to do that, then either the Weipo or as I mentioned before, the Kung Fu or Yushin. For cubers who only want speed in 2x2, get the Tangpo because it is super fast, So if you really like super fast 2x2s and don't care about really anything else, get the Tangpo. And if you're crunched for a budget, I would suggest the Kung Fu 2x2 because it's only $6. And I don't really think the Guanpo is worth the $4 if you can find an extra $2 and buy a Kung Fu 2x2. Thank you for watching this video comparison.